This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. Well, you don't know how to do it, and you hate it when you do it, but it's one of the most important things in your business, cold calling. I am here with the official queen of cold calling, Wendy Weiss. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, David. I'm happy to be here.
So I'll tell you, this whole cold calling thing, I think nothing in sales, and maybe even nothing in entrepreneurship, has a worse reputation. People go, oh, yeah, Wendy, I really hate cold calling. Let's unpack that first. Why do most of your clients and most of the folks that you coach and train, why do they come into working with you just hating this concept of cold calling so much?
People hate the concept of cold calling because so many people say really stupid things about the subject. You know, the bottom line is no matter where you find a lead, at some point you probably have to talk to that person on the phone. And if you can't handle that conversation, you're not going to get the appointment or whatever your next step is. You're not going to get them as a client or your customer. So step one is we need to get comfortable on the telephone. And let me share with you my definition of a cold call. That's any time you're speaking with someone that you do not know or do not know well, which includes pretty much everybody, unless they're already your client.
Now, there's all kinds of mythology and all kinds of craziness around this. And I want to unpack this because you're so good at it and you've got so many great resources and ideas. Some people say, well, you don't like cold calling because you don't know what to say in the first 10 seconds. And once you get past the first 10 seconds, then it becomes easy. Then it's just like talking to a friend. True or false? And then what is the magic in that opening statement or that first 10 to 15 seconds?
Can I go with somewhat true? Because you do have to get through the first 10 seconds, but then you've got another 10 seconds and another 10 seconds and another 10 seconds. So the real secret is a two-step process. Step one, identify the target. Lots of times, and this is marketing 101, you need to understand what's the target because you cannot say the same thing to everyone. So identify the target. And then the real secret, once you know the target, is what are the challenges that these prospects have that you can help them with, and how do they talk about it? Not how do you talk about it. How do they talk about it? Because when you get on the phone with someone, you want them to understand what it is you're talking about. Because if they don't understand what you're talking about, they're not going to ask you for an explanation. They're not going to say, oh, I have no idea what you're trying to tell me, but I have nothing else to do all day, so why don't you explain it? They'll just say, I'm not interested. So the real secret is being able to talk in an almost pedestrian manner, the same way that your prospects speak about what their challenges are. That's the real secret.
And what you're really touching on here is relevance, right?
Yes.
Relevance, that you need to have a relevant message or a relevant opening statement of some kind, opening question that gets them to immediately recognize that you're talking to them about a relevant problem in language that they recognize and with an issue that is somewhat urgent or at least important in their world.
Exactly. And I want to give you an example. And then I want to tell you a story about a call I got last week. Let me do the example first. We had someone in one of our programs who is a marketing consultant. She worked with nonprofit agencies. She was actually a fundraising consultant. She helped them put on their events, their fundraising events. So I said to her, well, why should these nonprofit agencies be interested in working with you? And she said, oh, we have a very special proprietary process. And I said, okay, so what? And then I said, tell me about your process. So she said, well, we interviewed the client. And I said, okay, so what? And then she said, well, we ask a lot of questions. And I said, okay, so what? And then she said, well, we analyze the answers. And I said, okay, so what? And then she said, well, then we make recommendations. And I said, okay, so what? How are they better off after you meet with them and you interview them and you ask them questions and you analyze the answers and you make recommendations? How are they better off? She said, oh, their fundraising events make money. So I said, bingo. So we helped her create an introduction that went something like, we work with nonprofit agencies that are sick of losing their shirts on their fundraising events. And the development directors and the executive directors at these nonprofit agencies then started talking to her. So, as you say, David, it's got to be relevant. And the story that I want to share, because a lot of people think that there's a difference between cold calling and, I'm making the finger quotes, warm calling. Warm calling is a concept that has been made up by salespeople and marketing consultants, because your prospects don't think they're warm. And I want to tell you a story. This happened, this was on Friday. I got a call from Bank of America. Now, I have a Bank of America credit card. I don't use it very often, but I do have one. So I picked up the phone and there was someone on the other end. I answered the phone. I said, this is Wendy Weiss. That's how I normally answer the phone. And he said, may I speak with Wendy Weiss? So right off the bat, he was down a point. But I said, this is Wendy. How may I help you? And he said, do you have time to talk? So I then said what every busy person in the entire world says when a complete stranger calls them and says, do you have time to talk? I said, I'm busy. What do you want? And then he said to me, well, this is a relationship call. And I said, I wasn't aware we had a relationship. Do we have a relationship? And he said, well, I'm calling from Bank of America. At which point I said, okay, is this about my credit card? Is there a problem with my credit card? And then he said, no, he wanted to invite me to the local branch so that we could discuss my finances. And I declined. And that was the end of the conversation. So the 2 points I want to make about this call is clearly somebody at Bank of America told this poor young man that he was making relationship calls and therefore they would be easy. And I'm sure he was having this same conversation with people over and over and over again. It wasn't easy because he didn't have anything to say. The second point I want to make is, had he had something to say, he was calling about a business credit card. He was calling my office. Maybe if he had said something business related about working capital or cash flow or something that I as a business owner might be interested in, maybe I would have gone to the branch and had a conversation with him. So forget about this concept of warm calls, cold calls, relationship calls. Focus on relevance.
I know I'm just channeling our listeners here, Wendy, and they're saying, wow, this all sounds great. But my problem is the only relationship I'm going to have with my prospects is voicemail. And you've got some very smart strategies about voicemail and sort of a voicemail sequence that we shouldn't just call and pester people and say, hi, it's David Newman. Call me back. Hi, David Newman. Do it marketing. Call me back. Hi, David Newman again. Call me back. What is a smart way to use voicemail? Because almost always at some point, probably early on and probably throughout a telephone-based sales process, we're going to hit voicemail time and time again. How do we get those voicemails answered?
That's a great question because, I've been doing this a long time. And when I started, voicemail didn't exist. People would answer their phones. It was easy. But today, more and more phone lines are answered by voicemail. So it's important to have a mechanism to get people to respond. And all of the research shows that it takes somewhere between 8 to 12 touches. And a touch can be a phone call, it could be a voicemail, it could be an email, it could be a text, it could be a letter, it could be social media. It's a touch. And it takes somewhere between 8 to 12 of them to get people to respond. And so knowing that, what we do, we start out with, we call it a voicemail campaign. And it is a series of voicemails and emails delivered over time. Sometimes people will say to me, well, Wendy, should I leave a voicemail? Isn't it better just to email? And I recommend doing both because there is research. There is actual research that shows that when people hear you talk, they are more likely to act on whatever it is you're talking about. So even if it's in a voicemail, when people hear you talk, they're more likely to respond. And what we have seen also internally and with our clients, because lots of times you get more response to the emails, so then people stop leaving the voicemail, the response rate goes down. So what we do is a series of voicemails. We usually start with 4 voicemails and 4 emails over a period of about a month. And you track because you might need more, maybe you need less, but you craft a voicemail and email combination. Basically, it goes like this. Week 1, you call. If you get voicemail, leave voicemail number 1, which focuses on the challenge that your prospects have that you can help them with in their language. And then you send exactly the same thing in an email. You wait about a week. If you haven't heard back, you call again. If you get voicemail, you leave voicemail number 2, which is different from number 1, still focuses on how you help, but it's a different message. And you send email 2. So the combinations mirror each other. Voicemail 2, email 2. Wait about a week. If you haven't heard back, you call again. If you get voicemail number 3, which is different from 1 or 2, still focuses on how you help clients, but it's a different message. You send along email number 3. Wait about a week. If you haven't heard back, you go with voicemail number 4. This one's different. I call it the move on message. It goes like this. Hi, David. I've been trying to reach you for some time to discuss fill in the blank with whatever it is you wanted to talk about. I haven't heard back from you. I know you're busy. I don't want to be a pest. I'm going to cease and desist, and I will check back with you and name a time frame. It could be 3 months. It could be 6 months. It could be a year. Just depends how many leads you have. And then you say, if you've been meaning to get back to me and you just haven't had the chance, I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss fill in the blank with whatever it is you want to talk about. And that's actually when you're going to get the most response is after the move on message. And actually, lots of times people will apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry. I've just been really busy. And the reason that this works, you have to have left some really compelling messages previously. However, your prospects think you're a salesperson. They think you're going to keep calling them. What most people do is at a certain point, they look at the name, this person that they have called however many times, and they just go, I don't want to call this guy anymore. And they just stop, but they never tell the prospect. So what you need to do is tell the prospect that, I don't want to be a pest. I'm going to stop. But if you've been meaning to respond, I'd love to talk to you. And that's when the people that want to talk to you will respond. And we see it over and over and over again. So it's a very step-by-step process. And then if you do not hear back, that's okay. Just recycle them. Try them again in 3 months or 6 months or a year. Again, depending on how many leads you have.
Hey, good looking. Are you currently getting paid to speak? Would you like to ramp that up? We can help. Book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team at doitmarketing.com/call, and let's see what we might do together. The call is free, but the results may be priceless. So I'll tell you a quick story from my bad old days of sales, because I know that you also have some really great ideas about qualifying and disqualifying. But this was probably about 10, 12 years ago. I was doing some local networking here in my area. I live outside Philadelphia. And it was this big accounting firm, big regional accounting firm. And this woman was the HR director, VP. And she made it sound like, man, she was the decision maker. Oh, David, we're going to bring you in. David, we're going to do your training. We want to have you come in and coach our executives and all this great stuff. So, hey, let's have breakfast. Let's have lunch. And I was wining and dining this person, as long as you call coffee and bagels wining and dining. I was having the breakfast. I was having the lunch. We were having follow-up calls, everything. Finally, about touch point 6 or 7, I said to her, well, we've been talking a lot about doing this training for your group, about doing some executive coaching, about helping them with the marketing aspect and the speaking aspect. When do you think we can put something together? She says to me, this is after 3 breakfasts, 3 lunches, 6 months of relationship building. Oh, well, I'm not really the person that decides that. And I was looking at her like, what? Oh, yeah, no, I would have to run that by the partners. I would have to run that by, the boss. I'd have to run that by the cleaning lady. I would have to run that by the dog. That's really not my focus. That's not my area. But, let's keep talking, which means why don't you keep buying me food? So to avoid that, let's talk about qualifying and disqualifying earlier than the David Newman strategy, when you're talking to the right person, when you're talking to a gatekeeper, and when you're completely talking to the wrong person.
Absolutely, because we want to disqualify before breakfast. Step one is, and I said this earlier, you have to identify the target. So you want to identify the highest level person that you think is the decision maker. And if you're calling small businesses, it's probably the owner, president, CEO, whatever they choose to call themselves. You want a person that can make a decision. And a big mistake that a lot of people make is they just start too low. They think it's, well, I'm never going to reach the boss, so I'm going to call the assistant manager. And then you get stuck buying breakfast and lunch and not actually accomplishing what you're looking to accomplish. Start at the top. If that person at the top says, oh, well, I let so-and-so handle that, before you then go off and call this other person, do ask some questions about how do they handle it and what is the process. And if so-and-so thinks this is a great idea, they think this is the greatest idea since sliced bread, will you sign off on it? Because if the answer is no, don't go talk to this other person. You want to be talking to the person that can make a decision. And as far as gatekeepers go, there are different schools of thought about this. I believe that if you believe in what you are doing, and that's really where it all starts, because if you don't, go find something else to do. But if you believe in what you are doing and you've done your homework and you've targeted well, your business is with the person that can make a decision, not with the second in command or the third in command or the office manager or the gatekeeper or somebody else. It's with the person that you can help. That would be the decision maker. And I would even take it a step further and say that contacting someone at a lower level or having these long involved conversations that I know people have with gatekeepers, I would argue you're doing that potential client a big disservice, because the more you talk to a gatekeeper, the likelihood of you actually having the conversation that you want to have with the person that could hire you goes down. Gatekeepers don't make decisions. I would argue that a gatekeeper's job is to put important calls through, and that includes yours.
This is a self-esteem thing, though, isn't it? That sometimes we identify as a salesperson, even if you're selling for a big giant corporation, but certainly if you're a more of an entrepreneurial salesperson, we sometimes mistakenly don't see ourselves on the same level as that president or business owner or CEO. And we might feel more comfortable befriending the gatekeeper because, oh, well, they're either at my level or they're a little bit below my level. So I'm just going to adopt this person as my new friend. That might be more comfortable than talking to the real decision maker, who might not be as easy to have a conversation with, quote unquote. So how do we build up some of that self-esteem? And you mentioned already something which is really important, that we have to believe in what we're selling, and we have to believe in the value, and we have to believe in the transformation that we're going to cause in this client company. I always teach people the same exact thing, which is you need to talk to the person that owns the problem. If you're coming in with a solution, the only person who's going to buy the solution is the one who owns the problem, and the one who owns the problem also owns the budget to solve that problem. But now where the rubber meets the road is this, which is your expertise. When we get that person on the phone, where do we get that assertiveness? Where do we establish that status of, hey, you're not better than me, I'm not better than you. This is a peer-to-peer, executive-to-executive sales conversation about a genuine exchange of value. How do we work on our mindset to really anchor that self-esteem so that we can make these kinds of calls?
Right. And that's really where it all starts. And you are so right. It is a peer-to-peer relationship, that to start to see yourself as a peer of the person that you're reaching out to. There are the facts, and then there are the stories that we tell ourselves about the facts. And the facts are, you're going to reach out to this other human being. You're going to either reach them or you're not. When you reach them, you're going to say something, they're going to say something, and that is pretty much it. Those are the facts. And the stories is often, oh, they're more important than I am. I'm bothering them. They're not going to be interested. They're just going to say no to me. And it's time to get another story. What if your story was, I'm reaching out to people that because I've done my homework, I have a pretty good idea that they might have a problem that I could help them with. So I'm going to reach out and I'm going to introduce myself. And I like to think of this as introductory calling. Forget I said earlier, warm calling is a figment of salesperson's imagination. Think introductory calling. You're calling to introduce yourself. You've done your homework. You're reaching out to people that you think have a problem that you can help them with. You're calling to introduce yourself. It's an introduction. We make introductions all the time. It's not, give me your credit card now. It's not, dump your vendor, hire me. It's an introduction. The other piece of this is just the preparation. I think you had said it earlier about the first 10 seconds, but what we've seen in our courses, because we do a lot of live group training and coaching programs, we do them online, so nobody has to go anywhere, but we work with everybody in the program on exactly what they're going to say and how to tell their unique story. Think about it. You have a unique story to tell. Each and every one of you that's listening to this, you have a unique story to tell. And on the phone, you need to be able to tell it kind of quickly. So we help everybody with telling their unique story. You have every right to reach out to the people that you're reaching out to. And I continue to believe that if you don't do that, you're doing them a disservice because you're not helping them. If they don't know you exist, you can't help them.
Absolutely right. There's so many great things. You've got books, you've got webinars, you've got training. I know one of the things that you talk a lot about is objections. So it's objections up front, it's objections about pricing. You've also got some great strategies of how to prevent and circumvent objections in the first place by having a real deep dive diagnostic conversation that would surface these objections before they become objections. Give us a couple of nuggets about objection prevention and objection handling, and even some of just the philosophy behind the way you teach it.
I said earlier that people say a lot of really dumb things about this topic. And one of the dumb things that people say about this topic is that the skill is in knowing what to say when you hear an objection. I actually think the skill is in knowing what to say so you don't hear the objection. So that's why in our courses, we spend so much time on what people are saying, how they're going to introduce themselves, because most people create the objections that they hear by what they are saying. The most popular question that I am asked all the time is, what do I say if the prospect says, I'm not interested? That's what everybody wants to know. What do I say? And there's only two reasons people say I'm not interested. The first reason is you're not talking to the right person. If you haven't done your homework and you're not talking to the person that owns the problem, they might say, I'm not interested, meaning, why are you calling me? I have nothing to do with this. The second, more popular, as it were, reason that people say I'm not interested is they don't think you're saying anything interesting. The way you introduce yourself is vitally important. In our programs, we spend time nitpicking words. Say this instead of that, because we don't want our clients to hear objections. That said, when you are prospecting, if you're looking to, let's say, set an appointment, an initial appointment, to have an in-depth conversation with your prospect. If the prospect does not immediately say yes, when you get your introduction right and you ask for the appointment, lots of times they go, okay, and they open up their calendars and they book the appointment. But if that doesn't happen, this is very predictable. We know that if someone does not immediately say yes to an appointment, they're likely to say that they're working with someone. They're likely to say that they're busy. They might say, send me information. And then the fourth one is they might say, I'm not interested. Again, you hear I'm not interested all the time. You need to fix what you're saying or who you're saying it to. But the other three, we know they're going to say that. So it's entirely possible to be prepared.
Well, let's also talk about sometimes we're in a more complicated sale where it's not just one person, but it might be multiple decision makers. So, for example, a speaker who's selling to an association, and the association, of course, has their conference committee, or a consultant where the entire C-suite has to sign off on a multi-six-figure consulting engagement. When there are multiple decision makers, and of course, most of our folks have businesses that are national, not always possible to show up, They're going to put you on that speakerphone in the middle of the conference room table. And there's going to be 3 to 10 people around that speakerphone. I say, hey, David, meet the team. We got Jill and Wendy and Bob and Fred and Sam and Susan. And you're like, oh my God, what the hell do I say to these 8, 10 people around the table? What are some ways, either on the phone or just kind of in your general sales experience, where do people blow it with that multiple decision maker conversation? And what are some keys to unlocking the vault to a good multiple person, multiple prospect conversation?
That's a great question. And as a matter of fact, I have a client that last week just went through this. He told me a story, which I will share with you in a moment. But when you're in that situation, typically, not all the time, but typically there's been one contact that you've had that has set up the group. And I said this earlier, start at the top. It's always better to start at the top and then have that person, that top contact that you've made, tell you who's going to be in the group and what their responsibilities are. My client who just went through this was on a conference call with like a dozen people. He had no idea who they were. He didn't even know their last names, didn't know what their responsibilities were. And it's much harder after the fact to get that information. And of course, you've already had the conference call. So step 1 is find out who's going to be on the call. And you can control the conversation to a certain extent by saying, they're going to ask you a question. Great question. Before I answer your question, let me know who's in the room and what areas you cover so I can make sure that I can address everything that you need to know, which is perfectly reasonable. And then that way you've got some control. Make sure you've got a notebook, so, a notepad, write down their names and what they say. So then that way you know who's in the group. And ask them if they don't do it automatically, unless you're doing a Zoom call and you can see them. If you don't know who they are when they ask you a question, ask, oh, that's a great question. Who's asking that question? Is that David or is that Fred? Make sure you know who's asking you the questions. This way you can exert some control in the situation because you need to know who's the wallet holder, who are the stakeholders, what their concerns are, how are they going to make this decision? You hang up the phone, what's going to happen? Make sure to ask all of the questions. Talk about my book for a moment. My book, The Sales Winner's Handbook, has chapter after chapter of questions to ask.
Yes. Full disclosure, hint, hint, hint. I've been pulling some of these questions right out of the Sales Winner's Handbook. So I am not only interviewing Wendy, I am an enthusiastic customer and client. So all the books, all the webinars, all the training, don't be a schmuck. This is the woman that you need to learn from. What a great episode. Wowza. Tell you what, if you want to ramp up your revenue as an expert who speaks professionally, you should really check out our free online training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. Let's talk about closing. I think the only thing that terrifies people more than cold calling, and again, there's a whole section, of course, in the Sales Winner's Handbook. How do we close the sale over the phone? And how do we not blow that part where it's like, okay, now's where you can ask for the check, or you don't ask for the check, or you somehow screw up asking for the check in the right way?
Yeah, that's a problem. And, it's so interesting to me because I know this is something that people worry about a lot. Closing actually starts with prospecting. If you start out on the right path with the right target and you're talking to the right person about the right things, it gets a lot easier to close. I had a client, they're an independent insurance agency, and he had just hired someone new. And he said to me, I don't think he has a problem with prospecting, but he can't close. Can you help him close? And I said, okay, well, tell me what's going on. So it turns out the new hire moonlights in a bar. He's doing personal lines of insurance. He's a bartender at night, and he's making appointments with all the people in the bar. And the people in the bar, they're not necessarily wanting insurance. And they're making appointments with him because he's a nice guy. He's serving them drinks. They don't keep the appointments, or if they do keep the appointments, they're like just not appropriate prospects. So this guy did not actually have a problem with closing. He had a problem with prospecting. That said, going through the process, if you think of the steps as first, getting the appointment with the appropriate wallet holder, that decision maker. Having an in-depth conversation with them. It's usually called discovery, where you ask all of the questions, get the answers, including the information about how they're going to make the decision, who's involved in the decision, how they've made decisions in the past. After that, you can start offering whatever your solution is and ask some questions. Does this sound like the kind of help you might be looking for? What do you think this would enable you to do? How does this sound? Because if they say, nah, that doesn't sound right, you're on the wrong track.
Yeah.
But if when you're getting agreement, you can tell them our next step is usually, or you can ask them what their next step is. I have a client right now. We just had a strategy session yesterday because he has a meeting on Monday. I said to him, okay, what's your goal? And he said, well, I want them to ask me for a proposal. And this is his initial meeting. He is a consultant. He works with Fortune 100 companies doing data analysis. So it's a very involved process. He may not be asked for a proposal in his first 30-minute phone call. So I had him take a step back. What are some goals that you can get along the path? And I told him, when you leave that meeting, you have to have the next step scheduled, identified and scheduled. That's where people always drop the ball, is they don't schedule whatever the next thing is. And if you have done all of those things and they've said, yes, this sounds like what we're looking for, and you ask them, it's likely to be in whatever the price range is. Does that sound workable for you? And they've said yes. If you have gotten agreement every step of the way, at the end, it's very easy to say, shall we get started? But most people kind of want to go from hello to, can I send you my contract? That doesn't usually work.
Can I send you my DNA sample? Can I send the blood work over?
And my firstborn.
Exactly. Wow. Really, really great conversation. And the last thing that you said just reminds me that, sometimes people say, oh, I need to do a better job closing. What they really need to do, as you mentioned, is they need to do a better job opening and listening.
Yes.
And then the closing will take care of itself.
Yes.
That's the true meaning, by the way, of a relationship sale, is when people feel heard, they feel connected with, and they feel they're buying something relevant and valuable. That's what the relationship is built on, is exchange of value and solving urgent, pervasive, expensive problems.
Exactly. If I'm speaking with someone who says, we don't have that problem, we don't need that, I don't then try and convince them that they do. They've just told me they're not a good prospect for me. I say, that's great. Thank you for your time.
Right.
A lot of people will just, for whatever reason, glom on. They hang on to that. They think it's a lead, but if somebody tells you they're not a good fit, believe them.
There you go. Now, I've got two final questions for you as we're wrapping up, and this was so great. The final question is, how can people get connected and stay connected to more Wendy Weiss and more of your fabulous resources, book, webinar, training, website, all kinds of cool things? We'll talk about that in a minute. But even before that, if folks were to take one key concept from our conversation today about effectively using the phone for business development, what do you hope, from the queen of cold calling herself, what do you hope that one central concept that they take away would be?
The central concept that I hope everybody that's watching this today, I hope you all take away, and I believe that Henry Ford said it first. He said, either you think you can or you think you can't. And either way, you're right. You didn't ask me today, David. Sometimes people ask me about my background. This was not my first career. My first career was, I was a ballet dancer. I didn't know anything about business, but I was lucky because somebody taught me how to do this, and learning this skill, it enabled me to build a business. So for any of you that might be struggling or you're uncomfortable, it's okay. You can learn how to do this. You don't have to love it. It's just one of the things you do in business. To be successful, you need to talk to people. The idea is not that you love it. The idea is that you're neutral, that you can do what you need to do and be successful at it. So that would be my number one wish for everyone watching this today.
Fantastic. And now, how do people get connected and stay connected? We're going to link up all these resources right under this episode at thespeakingshow.com. Wendy, where can people go to connect more with your brilliance?
Thank you for asking that question too. So we talked about my book, The Sales Winner's Handbook, which you're going to post right below this. I also want to invite everybody to complimentary online training. It's called Get More Qualified Appointments in the Next 24 Hours. And in this online training, I walk through, I call it my 4P prospecting process. There are 4 steps to being successful at getting more qualified sales appointments quickly. We're going to send that information to you and you'll post that below as well. And I also invite you to my website, visit me at coldcallingresults.com.
That's what it's all about, my friend. Results. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Your Highness. Always a pleasure to talk with the Queen of Cold Calling. Such a great interview, Wendy. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.